going to hand over to Sushma. She'll come and talk about, now that I've an idea, I have all the pieces, how am I going to build my technical solution roadmap? So Sushma, first I would like you to introduce yourself and then take them through the technology solution implementation journey.
Thanks, Chaitra. Those were some amazing nuggets. Hey, everyone, super excited to be here. I'm Sushma. I lead engineering team at Apartment List. Our engineering team is about 50. So one of the key points Chaitra touched upon is understanding the customer you're solving the problem for. So today I want to focus on how do we bring these ideas to reality? What does that process journey look like? So there are 3 important pillars, as you see here, to consider when you think about a solution implementation. One is the team structure itself. A famous author called Patrick Dixon once said, mission is at the heart of what you do as a team. Goals are merely steps to its achievement. Teams that rally around a mission are the ones that are most excited, most successful, and most energized. When we form teams, we should definitely look at a composition as one of the key elements. The second pillar is the collaboration itself. So we have a mission. Now we put the right people together. Now we should just expect them to collaborate well, right? Wrong. They don't always happen organically. Collaborations have to be aided to remove some of the inefficiencies on the team. And we'll dive into each of those in a moment. And lastly, the technical aspect itself and the decisions around architecture that we make that usually guide the success as well as the longevity of a project, product, feature, solution that you might be building. So let's dive into each of these. Next slide, please. So the first one is the team structure itself. So there are many ways to organize teams depending on your organization composition, but I want to talk about 2 prominent methods here. So one is the functional teams, and the second one is the mission-driven teams. Functional teams are usually common during the early stage of a company or even when you're building a platform or a solution ground up. So if, for example, you're building a brand new website ground up, or you're building a native app because you found great adoption on your web platforms and now you want to expand into other areas. You might be building a SaaS product or a B2B solution. For a lot of these, like when you're trying to build something from scratch, functional team composition makes sense. But however, if you're trying to build a feature or a product that involves identifying the right customer problem, like you don't even have a customer problem yet, that involves doing market research, that involves building some prototypes, validating your hypothesis, running A/B tests, and validating if this idea can actually become reality, you're better off with mission-driven teams. I've worked at startups as well as enterprise, and I have actually most of the time leaned on forming mission-driven teams, unless it's like really early stage or it's tech heavy, because I think those teams enable better collaboration long term. And the reason for this composition is like really simple. If you're building a platform which is very tech heavy, this structure of functional teams provides the most efficiencies because the balance is tipped more towards engineering. You need that team to be focused on that one problem, and there are a lot of technical decisions to be made. So you actually let that team focus, and there is one person normally trying to interface with the stakeholders and bringing those requirements in. But otherwise, if it's a more balanced team, you have way too many touch points for one person to carry on. So it leads to more inefficiencies, and you're better off organized as a mission-driven teams. And historically, like when companies that build solutions to enterprise have tried to organize as functional teams, like usually with like one project manager or one person coordinating in the middle, it's not sustainable long-term because of the gaps that can exist in that communication. And 2, it's a single point of failure. And if this person leaves or has to go on a vacation, then you start to have a lot of communication gaps. As now startups have been evolving, we see the second structure, which is the mission-driven team, being more common to form a team. that drives better collaboration. So next slide, I want to talk about how can we aid better collaboration. Next slide, please. So, so one of the biggest pieces here is how can we convert UI concepts to working prototypes, and how can we do that with better collaboration? So there are 3 key steps here. One is identifying the user problem through research. And the second one is defining the right OKRs, like objectives and key results. And then lastly, it's the right tools and systems. Before you start on any project, you need to be in tune with 2 things. One is your user you're solving the problem for, and your brand. So the user, basically, what problems are they facing? Trying to understand if it's valuable to solve this problem. Is it one user or many users facing this problem? What does the scale of that problem look like? And on the brand side, you want to understand the brand and the feature or the product that you're trying to build. How does that align with the brand vision and goals long term? So on one side, you're trying to understand the user problem, and on the other side, you're trying to understand what the core goals of the brand are to create that alignment. And secondly, once you have that goal, you need to define a path to get there and path to accomplish that goal. Still on the previous slide, please. How do I validate if these paths are right at each and every step? That is your OKR. At my company, we define objectives as user problems we want to solve first, and then key results are the results by which you want to validate if these problems are solved. Like these are, you can treat these as metrics. So a user problem would be like, apartment list is a 2-sided marketplace. So as a renter, I am not able to find the properties that I need very quickly. And then a key result might be the one way to accomplish that is to aid better discovery, and I'll validate better discovery by these hypotheses, and this is how I'm going to measure them. When it comes to a B2B or an enterprise solution, it's the same thing. I want to sell this particular product. I want to build adoption to this particular solution, and how will I actually measure that the adoption has actually occurred? And then lastly, the right tools. The collaboration between designers, engineers, collaboration between the product managers, engineers, and designers, user researchers. How can you aid? You can only do that with having the right tools. So some of the tools that we use at every step, at least for the design collaboration between design and engineering, we use Figma. Like how engineers have peer review process, how they have version control, where they can manage different changes that have occurred. Similarly, on the design side, we want to be able to do the same. And then as those changes occur, we want engineers to be notified that, okay, I have changed this asset and I've changed this flow, and now take a look and then use those assets. So you want to have the right set of tools. The second thing that we also do is design system. This is basically a system that you maintain to drive consistency across the brand. What does your typography look like? What does your how should your buttons look? How should what do your brand guidelines dictate? What type of colors do you want to have on your product or your solution? Having that right design system helps with efficiencies long term as well. So the next slide, I want to talk about the development considerations. So as we think about building a solution and bringing it to a real world, these are like the four main considerations. So one is the architecture itself. So how many people I need to build my solution for, and like the scale a lot of times is extremely important to identify early on. The reason is the scale determines the architecture style. It determines how I want to deploy this. If it's a small set of users, if you're at the beginning of that product life cycle, you might want to decide to just build a monolithic application. But if you want to scale it to millions and billions of users, then you might actually change your entire architecture. So how many users are you going to support? What type of architecture style you want to support? How do you see it evolving over a period of time? How do I make sure that my system is up and running without any issues? And if there are issues, how can I ensure I jump in and fix the problem pretty quickly? So logging, monitoring, solutions like it could be Datadog, it could be Splunk, application monitoring, logging, all these solutions are extremely important to figure out early on in the life cycle. And then lastly, the deployment aspect. Are you going to enable continuous integration, continuous deployment? Do you want, the moment you make a change, do you want to wait for a release cycle? Do you want to push it to production immediately? And if you do, how do you actually validate everything is accurate? So that brings me to the second point about testing and rollout. So how do I actually create tests early on? Do I actually form a process called test-driven development? Are the teams using the right test cases? Are they making sure that any changes that I make are validated? And especially with enterprise solutions, you need to extremely be aware that it can impact businesses and it can impact revenue in a huge way, even with a small issue. So you want to get some of those thinking early on in the life cycle. The second thing is around A/B tests. There are enterprise solutions like Slack or Microsoft Teams. And if I want to test out a new feature, do I want to do an A/B test? Do I want to do a stage rollout, like where I release this feature for 10% of my users and see how it's performing, and then maybe slowly roll it out to 25, 30, 50, and so on. And lastly, what type of metrics I want to measure. In a SaaS product, is it a registration metric? Do I want to measure the number of users that I'm driving to the platform? Do I want to measure the engagement itself, the time spent on a particular app? And the third one that's very key is infrastructure. How am I going to deploy this? Infrastructure, almost always, these decisions are directly proportional to the cost that you're actually going to be spending, your OpEx. So you want to make the right decisions, keeping the number of users and scaling considerations in mind. So do I want to deploy this in the data center or the cloud? Do I want a disaster recovery strategy, like where if something bad happens, what is my strategy to switch over to a different cloud provider? Do I go hybrid cloud? How do I get from non-production to production? How do I validate those tests in an environment that is safe, that does not impact customers? And then how do I deploy it to production? The network topology itself, I want to make sure that my systems are secure. They are within my network. The right systems talk to the right services, and there are no loopholes. The right systems are connected out to the internet without any problems. What does my data pipeline look like? Because ultimately, once you build a solution product, you want to have a business intelligence angle to be able to really understand how the engagement with the platform or product is working and what I need to be building in the future as well. So how do you lay down all these pipelines? And lastly, the cost considerations. As I said, the cost of storage, the cost of processing power, all of these are key in making sure that you're building the right effective solution. And lastly, security, which is the most important aspect of all of this, especially if you are a B2B solution. How can I make sure if my customers are banks, or they care about PCI, they care about HIPAA and all these guidelines? How do I make sure the data that I'm sharing, the data of my customers that I have, are safe and secure? We have the right access controls. We have strict identity access management. The right people have access to the right systems, and not everybody has access to everything. Data segregation, how do I make sure that if I have multiple customers in my B2B enterprise, how do I make sure one customer's data is separate from the other customer's data, and there is no sharing of information without explicit consent? Code analysis, continuing to make sure that we don't introduce vulnerability in the software, as well as continued monitoring, pen testing, and annual audits. So this checklist is definitely handy if you want to think about building a full, well-rounded solution.